There is a particular kind of grief that wears a uniform. It stands straight. It keeps its jaw level. It folds a flag with practiced hands and presents it to a widow without letting the eyes water, because the men watching need to believe that this, all of this, still means something, that the loss has weight, that the weight can be carried. Admiral Raymond Cole had folded that flag 41 times in his career. He had never once looked away. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, he stood at the edge of a grave at Arlington National Cemetery and watched a young widow receive the symbol of her husband's life with both trembling hands. The flag, the salute, the rifle volley that split the cold air like a sentence with no ending. Cole kept his face neutral because the men behind him were watching, and men who have buried their own brothers need to see that it is possible to stand upright in the presence of loss. He was very good at this. He had been doing it for 6 months, not at Arlington, but 7 miles away in Bethesda, in a room that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, beside a bed where his daughter lay motionless, and the machines made all the decisions her body could no longer make. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center occupied the kind of institutional authority that only federal buildings achieve, the weight of permanent stone, the silence of corridors that have absorbed too many difficult conversations, the particular quality of light in places where people come to be fixed and sometimes are not. ICU Ward 3 sat on the east wing of the 4th floor. Room 7 had been Kate Cole's room for 183 days. She was 24 years old. Brown hair, always brushed by the night nurses because her father had asked them to keep it that way. Skin still warm because the machine saw to that. She didn't look like a woman who had been declared brain dead in March. She looked like a woman who had fallen asleep somewhere she hadn't intended to and hadn't found her way back yet. That was the thing about Kate Cole. She had always looked like she was about to come back. Her father had been believing that for 6 months. The medical team had stopped believing it after week 2. Morgan Blake arrived at Ward 3 at 6:45, 45 minutes before her shift began. She was 29, with blonde hair tied back in the manner of someone who had learned to keep everything secured and out of the way a long time ago. Her badge read, Nursing Staff, Probationary, which was accurate in the technical sense and deeply misleading in every other. She moved through the ward with the economy of motion belonging to people trained in spaces where unnecessary movement cost something. Time, noise, lives. The other nurses assumed she was eager. New graduates sometimes came in that way. Nobody looked closely enough to see the difference between eagerness and vigilance. She had been assigned to Kate Cole's room as comfort care support. In hospital language, help the family process, keep the environment calm, do not interfere with the clinical team's timeline. Morgan was good at being present without appearing to have authority. She was also very good at reading charts. In 3 weeks of pre-shift visits, she had read Kate's full medical record 11 times. She had mapped the EEG readouts against the nursing notes, against the pharmacy log, against the ventilator data. She had filled half a pocket notepad with observations she had not shared with anyone because she needed to be certain before she spoke and because she understood exactly what it would cost her if she was wrong. On the morning of day 183, she stood beside Kate's bed watching the monitor. The EEG software was filtering a recurring micro-pattern as artifact noise. It had been filtering it for as long as Morgan had been watching. The software was designed to prioritize clean data. It was not designed to recognize the difference between electrical interference and a brain that was trying against enormous resistance to signal. Morgan recognized the difference. She had learned it in a place where the software didn't exist, and the only tool available was the knowledge in her hands. She didn't touch Kate yet. She just watched. And she committed the pattern's timing to memory the way she had once committed patrol schedules, not because she was told to, but because she understood that the moment would come when everything depended on what she had been paying attention to when no one else was. Admiral Cole arrived at 8:15 in dress uniform, as he did every morning. He nodded to Morgan as he entered. He had learned every nurse's name in the first week, which was not something grieving family members typically did, and which told Morgan something about the kind of man he was. He sat beside the bed. He placed one hand over Kate's. He did not speak. He simply looked, with the steadiness of a man who has decided that looking is the one thing he can still do. Doctor. Gerald Marsh arrived at 8:30 with 2 residents and a folder he carried with the authority of a man who considers paperwork an extension of his own judgment. He was 52, silver-haired, polished, the kind of physician who had learned early that confidence delivered calmly was indistinguishable from competence. He had signed Kate's brain death declaration in March. He closed the door behind the residents. "Admiral?" He did not sit. Standing made the conversation shorter. "I want to be straightforward with you because I believe you deserve that." Cole looked up. His face did not change. "Kate has been in a persistent vegetative state for 183 days. Every confirmatory test, conducted multiple times using multiple methodologies, has returned the same finding. The diagnosis is not in question. The Ethics Board has reviewed her case on 2 separate occasions." Marsh paused, setting the folder on the tray table and producing a pen. "It is time, Admiral." He let the pen rest beside the paper. "If you are unable to make this decision today, the hospital has legal authorization to petition the courts. That process would take approximately 3 weeks. It would be public." Another pause, precisely timed. "I don't believe you want that for her, or for yourself." One of the residents near the door exhaled slowly. He had seen Marsh deliver this speech before. The pause before or for yourself was always the same. Morgan stood at the back of the room with her clipboard against her ribs. She watched Cole's hand move toward the pen. Stop. Move again. Stop. She had approximately 30 seconds. She took one step forward. "Sir?" She addressed Cole, not Marsh. "May I check something?" One last time. Marsh's head turned with the speed of a man interrupted mid-surgery. "Nurse, do not give this family false hope. That is not your role here." Morgan didn't respond to him. She looked at Cole. Cole was looking at her. His eyes, which had been the eyes of a man already releasing his grip, sharpened. Not with hope, but with something older and more reliable. The instinct of someone who has survived by reading rooms correctly when everything around him argued the situation was already decided. He gave the smallest nod. Morgan walked to the bedside without hesitation. She leaned over Kate and positioned 2 fingertips behind the right ear at the junction of the mastoid process and the posterior auricular nerve. The placement was exact. No fumbling, no adjustment. The pressure was specific in a way that suggested it had been measured before, in different circumstances, in a place where the difference between 1 millimeter and another was a life. The monitor changed. A small spike in the EEG readout. Not large, not cinematic, clean and sharp and real. Marsh said immediately, "Artifact, you've..." Morgan pressed again. Same location, same pressure. The spike returned. Cole leaned forward. His posture, locked in military geometry since March, broke at the shoulders. He stared at the waveform the way a man stares at something he was told no longer existed. Morgan raised her eyes to him. "Call the neurologist," she said. Marsh stepped forward and placed himself between Morgan and Cole, using the full architecture of his authority, his title, his 9 years in this building, the 2 ethics board reviews, the confirmed diagnosis, to construct a wall that a probationary nurse had no business scaling. He spoke directly to Cole, fluent and practiced, each sentence landing with the weight of institutional certainty. He spoke well. He always spoke well. Cole listened. His face was unreadable, but his eyes tracked back to the monitor once between Marsh's sentences, and once more. Morgan walked to the wall panel and pressed the call button. When the desk answered, she said, "This is Nurse Blake, ICU Room 7. I need neurology at bedside immediately. Dr. Voss?" if she's available." Marsh turned. "Cancel that." Morgan looked at Cole. Cole looked at the pen on the folder, at Kate's hand, which he had been holding every morning for 6 months. At the monitor, where the waveform from those 2 small spikes had already been swallowed back into the baseline readout. Then he placed his hand flat on the folder and slid it off the tray table. It fell to the floor. His voice, when it came, carried the particular weight of a decision that has been made and will not be revisited. "Nobody touches that cord until I hear what she has to say." Marsh stood very still, the stillness of a man calculating what he could still control. The resident near the door looked at the floor. He was young enough to recognize the difference between what was happening and what should be happening, and experienced enough to understand that pointing it out was not his role. Morgan returned to the bedside. She stood close to Kate's head, monitoring the readouts, her breathing controlled. While the room reorganized itself around Cole's authority and Marsh's recalculation, she reached for the medical chart at the foot of the bed and turned to the original intake documentation from the night of Kate's admission. She had read this section before. Something made her look again at the authorization line, the official who had signed the emergency treatment priority order on the night Kate arrived. A bureaucratic formality usually. A signature from whatever government office was available to authorize expedited care for military dependents. The name on the authorization was not a doctor, not a hospital administrator. It was a government office, a specific one. Morgan read the name, read it again. She had seen it before. Not in this building, not in any hospital. In a classified briefing in the autumn of 2019, in a room she was not officially supposed to have been in, under an identity that had not been hers for very long. She closed the chart and returned it to the hook. Her hands did not shake, but something in her chest shifted. The cold, precise feeling of understanding arriving before you are ready for what it means. Whatever had happened to Kate Cole had not begun in this hospital. It had been authorized before she arrived, and the man who authorized it was not making a medical decision. The door opened. Dr. Patricia Voss walked in fast, navy scrubs, hair pulled tight, eyes the color of someone who had been ready for an emergency since before breakfast. She went straight to the monitor, read it, looked at Cole, looked at Marsh, then looked at the probationary nurse at the head of the bed. "You called for neuro," she said. "What happened?" Marsh answered first. He answered too quickly. Morgan watched his face as he spoke. In the speed of his answer, in the way his eyes moved to the chart before they moved to the patient, she confirmed something she had already begun to suspect. He was not afraid of being wrong. He was afraid of being found out. She met Voss's gaze. "I can show you," she said, "if you'll let me." Voss studied the badge, probationary, then studied Morgan's face with the assessment speed of a physician who has learned to read whether someone knows what they're talking about or only believes they do. Whatever she found made her nod. "Show me." Morgan positioned her fingers behind Kate's ear. Same placement, same pressure. The monitor spiked. Small, clean, unmistakable. Voss leaned in and watched the waveform for 10 full seconds. Admiral Cole stood on the other side of the bed watching his daughter's face, and for the first time in 6 months, he was not watching it to say goodbye. Dr. Voss conducted the brainstem examination with the deliberate precision of someone creating a record. She spoke every finding aloud, and Morgan understood the choice immediately. Voss was constructing a verbal log that every person and device in the room would carry. She understood that what happened in this room was going to matter later, in a context that went beyond medicine. Pupillary response, minimal, present, corneal reflex, faint, reproducible. Marsh's jaw tightened with each finding. Voss checked the gag reflex. Once, then firmer. A pause that lasted long enough for the residents to exchange a glance. Then, without inflection, "There is response." Marsh laughed, sharper than he intended. "We have conducted this examination multiple times over 6 months. Every finding has been consistent." "Then explain this one," Voss said, moving to the next reflex test without looking at him. Cole had stopped breathing. His hand had tightened around Kate's. 6 months of iron composure, and he was holding his daughter's hand like a man who has just felt the ground shift and doesn't yet know in which direction. Morgan stood at the head of the bed and watched Voss's hands, not Kate's face. She knew the truth would arrive in the physician's hands first. Kate's heart rate climbed without warning, not gradually, fast, with the urgency of something that had been waiting for permission. The ventilator alarm triggered. A resident stepped back involuntarily. Voss looked at the ICU nurse. The question was unspoken. The nurse shook her head. Nothing in the last 48 hours. She hasn't been sedated in months. Brain-dead bodies do not react. They do not respond to environment or voice or the presence of the people who love them. The brainstem manages the architecture of survival. Breathing, swallowing, the reflexes that pull a hand from heat. And if the brainstem is gone, those systems are gone with it. Kate's systems were not gone. Kate's systems were reacting. Cole leaned down slowly. He brought his face close to his daughter's ear, and what came out of him had nothing military left in it. "Sweetheart, I'm here. I'm not leaving you." Kate's fingers twitched. One motion, small, directed. Marsh stepped forward. Spinal reflex, involuntary arc response to. Spinal reflexes don't respond to specific voices. Morgan's tone was level, not combative, the tone of someone reporting a fact they are certain of. The response occurred within 1 second of the Admiral speaking. That's not a spinal arc. That's recognition. Marsh turned on her. "You are a probationary nurse. You are not qualified to interpret." "Then let Dr. Voss interpret it." Voss had not stopped watching Kate's face during the exchange. She turned to Marsh now. Her expression was that of a physician who has made a diagnosis and is deciding how to say it. "She is not brain dead," Voss said. The room went quiet. "I am not prepared to make a full determination in the next 10 minutes, but what I have observed in the last half hour is significantly inconsistent with the current diagnosis." She turned to the ICU nurse. "Full tox screen stat, and I want the original brain death documentation packet, every page, every signature, every timestamp." She looked at Morgan. "And I want you to pull any independent documentation you've been maintaining separately." Morgan reached into her left scrubs pocket and produced the notepad. Carol Wright arrived before the documentation did. She was the hospital administrator, a composed woman in a gray blazer who entered the room the way administrators enter rooms where something has gone wrong, which is to say with careful, measured steps and the particular energy of someone already calculating the distance between the event and the institution. Behind her came Derek Shaw from Risk Management and a hospital attorney with a leather portfolio. Wright spoke directly to Cole in the practiced warmth of someone trained to move a grieving father from one position to another without him registering the transition. "Admiral, we absolutely support Dr. Voss's additional evaluation. In the interest of Kate's comprehensive care, we believe the most appropriate next step is transfer to a civilian neurorehabilitation facility where an independent team—" "No," Cole did not raise his voice. The word simply arrived in the room and occupied it completely. "You want to move her out of this building," he said. "Out of this ward. Away from whatever Dr. Voss is about to find in that documentation." Wright's expression held, but her eyes did not. "That is not— If anyone attempts to transfer my daughter without my explicit written authorization," Cole said, in the voice that had commanded men in darkness on 4 continents, "I will have JAG and the Inspector General in this building before she reaches the elevator. The transfer is finished as a subject of discussion." Shaw looked at the attorney. The attorney looked at his portfolio. Morgan, standing slightly behind Voss, watched Wright's face. There was something in the micro-expression, a flicker too fast for most people to catch, that told her this was not simply a bureaucrat protecting an institution from liability. This was a woman who had received instructions and was watching them fail. She leaned close to Cole's shoulder and said quietly, "Sir, they're not protecting the hospital from a lawsuit. They're afraid of what's in the original files." Cole looked at her with the eyes of a man who has extracted signal from noise in situations where getting it wrong was fatal. "Show me," he said. The documentation packet arrived in a folder that was too clean. Hospital records accumulated where? Coffee rings, bent corners, the physical evidence of multiple hands in varying degrees of urgency. This folder was pristine. It had been kept somewhere carefully. Voss opened it at the tray table. Morgan stood at her shoulder. She found the first discrepancy on page 4. The timestamp on the second confirmatory brain death examination read 14:32 on March 3rd. Morgan had memorized the nursing notes for March 3rd 3 weeks ago because nursing notes were logged in real time by multiple staff in an automatically time-stamped system, the hardest part of any record to alter retroactively. The nursing notes for 14:28 on March 3rd showed a full ventilator alarm response. A respiratory team had been in this room managing an airway event. The room had been occupied by at least 4 clinical staff for a minimum of 20 minutes. The second confirmatory exam required unobstructed access to the patient and uninterrupted time to conduct reflex testing. The physician could not have been in this room at 14:32. Morgan pointed. "One finger, no words." Voss read the timestamp. "Read the nursing notes. Read the timestamp again." She turned to page 7. The name of the second attending, the signature required by protocol to confirm brain death, was Dr. William Cross. The staff board in the break room listed Cross as on extended medical leave since February. He had not been in this building on March 3rd. His signature was on a form dated March 3rd. Voss set the folder down with the care of someone handling evidence. She looked across the room at Marsh, said nothing. But Marsh saw her look, and something in his face lost its color. "This documentation has been falsified," Voss said. She said it to the room, not to any single person. She said it with the finality of words that cannot be unsaid once spoken aloud in front of witnesses. "Right. That is a very serious—" "It is a fact," Voss said. 3 independent corroborating discrepancies across separate hospital systems. If you want, I can walk through each one while your attorney takes notes." The attorney did not open his portfolio. Morgan stepped back from the table and removed her notepad. She crossed to Voss and opened to the page she needed. 12 lines. Dates, drug names, dosages, evaluation windows. Voss read it once. Read it again. When she looked up, her face had the expression of a physician whose entire framework for this case had been reconstructed from the floor. Cisatracurium, a neuromuscular blocking agent, administered 9 times across 6 months at intervals of 2 to 4 weeks. Each dose calibrated to fall just below the automatic pharmacy alert threshold. Each administration timed to the 48-hour window preceding a scheduled neurological evaluation or family consultation. Neuromuscular blocking agents do not affect brain activity. They affect the body's ability to express it. They paralyze voluntary motor function, the blink, the grip, the flinch, while leaving the brain completely intact. They make a living person appear exactly like one who has stopped. "Run a full tox screen," Morgan said. "Specifically cisatracurium metabolites. Long clearance window." Voss looked at her steadily. "If you're right, then someone has been maintaining this diagnosis," Morgan said. "Not recording it, maintaining it on purpose. For 6 months." She paused, then said, "And the name on Kate's original admission authorization, the government office that signed the emergency priority order the night she arrived. I need you to verify it through a system outside this hospital's network, independently." "Voss, why?" "Because I recognize the name, and if I'm right about it, this didn't begin here." Voss held her gaze for 1 beat. Then she turned and walked out of the room toward the external terminal at the end of the corridor. Cole had been listening to all of it. He was a man trained to construct tactical pictures from incomplete information, and the picture assembling itself in front of him was the worst he had ever looked at. He turned to Marsh. His voice, when it came, was almost conversational. "You're telling me my daughter was never brain dead?" Marsh: "Admiral, the complexity of brain injury presentation, you're telling me someone kept her this way. Deliberately. For 6 months. While I sat in this room and held her hand and you told me to sign the paperwork." Marsh opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Cole took one step toward him. He did not raise his hands. "Who gave the order?" The silence that followed was total. Marsh said nothing. But his eyes moved, involuntarily, less than a second, toward Carol Wright. Wright looked at the floor. Cole saw it. Morgan saw it. And across the room, in a moment that would be described in subsequent federal testimony as the pivotal turn of the case, the resident near the door saw it too and took a quiet step sideways, putting deliberate distance between himself and the man at the foot of the bed. Cole removed his phone from his breast pocket. He called the Department of Justice Inspector General's office directly. He had the number from testimony 3 years prior. And when the line connected, he spoke with the precision of a man filing an operational report. "This is Admiral Raymond Cole. I need an investigator at Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda immediately. I have evidence of falsified medical documentation, unauthorized pharmacological agents administered to a patient under my guardianship, and potential criminal conspiracy involving hospital administration." He paused. "And I need every surveillance feed in ICU Ward 3 secured for the past 6 months before anyone in this building has the opportunity to delete them." He ended the call. He looked at Wright, at Shaw, at the attorney who had finally opened his portfolio but appeared to have forgotten why. "No one leaves this ward," he said. "No one modifies a chart, a record, or a digital file. If anyone makes a phone call that is not to their personal attorney, I will characterize it as obstruction and say so to the investigator when she arrives." Wright opened her mouth. Cole looked at her. She closed it. Voss returned 9 minutes later. She came directly to Morgan and held out a printout. The admission authorization record accessed through the hospital's federal compliance portal, independent of the ward's own record system. She said nothing. She simply showed Morgan the name. Morgan looked at it, looked at Voss, gave one small nod. Then she crossed the room to Cole and showed him. Cole read the name. He was still for 3 full seconds, the stillness of a man who has suspected something and is now holding the confirmation in his hand and understanding that confirmation changes everything. "Senator Frank Delaney," he said quietly. It was not a question. Voss pulled Morgan aside near the medication cart. "That technique behind the ear," she said. "The medication log you tracked for 3 weeks with no one asking you to. The way you read that pharmacy record with your eyes and identified a drug pattern before the tox screen came back." She looked at Morgan directly. "None of that is a bridge nursing program." "No," Morgan said. "It isn't." "What were you before this?" A pause that contained more information than most sentences. "A medic, the kind they don't list in the program." Voss absorbed this. JSOC. Morgan neither confirmed nor denied it. "Delaney's name on that authorization. I saw it in 2019. Classified briefing. He was connected to a private military contracting firm with significant Defense Department business." Cole's testimony put that firm in the center of the Syria mission compromise. She looked through the glass at Kate. As long as Kate was in that bed, Cole wasn't in Washington, wasn't pressing the investigation. The implication was always there, even if nothing was ever said directly. Voss: "And you came here because the thread led here," Morgan said. "What happened in that room today? I didn't plan it. I saw a patient whose chart didn't match her monitor." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Your file is going to be opened when this goes to federal investigation. I know. Are you prepared for that?" Morgan looked at Kate's monitor, the micro pattern that the software had filtered for 6 months now running clean and unmistakable because the cisatracurium was finally beginning to clear and nothing was suppressing it anymore. "Yes," she said. Kate Cole's hand moved. Morgan was standing close to the bed when it happened. No technique, no pressure point. Kate's 4 fingers closed slowly around 2 of Morgan's and held on with the grip of something that has been waiting in the dark for a very long time and has finally found something solid. Not a reflex, a direction, an intention. Cole saw it from across the bed. His breath left him in a single, slow exhale. "She chose you," he said. The words came out barely above a whisper. Morgan looked down at their joined hands. She didn't pull away. She leaned close and said, in the voice she had used in a field hospital in Kandahar when a Marine who was not supposed to be alive needed to know that someone could hear him, "You're safe. We have you." Kate's fingers tightened once. Deliberate. An answer. From the corner of Kate's left eye, one thin line of water traced the proof of everything the paperwork had spent 6 months trying to erase. She had been there the entire time. The talk screen came back 40 minutes later. Voss read the results standing at the nursing station, and she read them twice before she spoke. Cisatracurium metabolites, present in concentrations consistent with repeated low-dose administration over a sustained period. 9 distinct clearance windows across the 6-month admission. The chemistry was written into Kate's blood the way all truth eventually writes itself. Quietly, patiently, waiting for someone to look in the right place. She walked back into room 7 and addressed the space between Marsh and Cole with the flat precision of someone reading coordinates. This patient was administered a neuromuscular blocking agent on at least 9 separate occasions across 6 months. Each dose was calibrated to fall below automated pharmacy alert thresholds. Each administration corresponds to the 48-hour window preceding a scheduled neurological evaluation or family consultation. She stopped. This was not an accidental dosing. This was not a protocol adjustment. The pharmacological evidence is consistent with deliberate repeated administration designed to suppress motor response and simulate brain death during assessment periods. The attorney's pen stopped moving. Derek Shaw took 1 step backward toward the wall, the involuntary movement of a man creating distance between himself and something that is becoming something other than a liability matter. Marsh stood at the foot of the bed and said nothing. His face had completed its journey from authority to calculation to something that had no professional name, the expression of a man deciding how much truth to release in order to control how much of it destroys him. Special Agent Dana Reyes arrived from the DOJ Inspector General's office 50 minutes after Cole's call. She was efficient in the way of someone who had been to medical facilities before and understood that the first priority was evidence preservation, and the second was preventing the institutional machine from quietly digesting itself before she could see what it contained. 2 federal agents followed her directly to the surveillance system without speaking to anyone. Reyes looked at the room. She looked at the documentation on the tray table, the tox screen in Voss's hand, right against the wall, the attorney with his sealed portfolio. She looked at Marsh last, and in the look she gave him, professional, patient, already knowing, Marsh appeared to make a decision. "I need to speak to an attorney," he said. "That's your right," Reyes said, "but I want you to understand something first." She held up the falsified documentation packet. 3 corroborating discrepancies. A confirmed tox screen. Surveillance footage we're pulling right now. The attorney you call in the next 5 minutes is going to tell you the same thing I'm about to. The only leverage you have left is timing. Marsh looked at the floor for a long moment. Then he started talking. He had not ordered the Cisatracurium himself. He had received what he described as a priority care instruction, routed through Carol Wright's office, framed in the language of national security, presented as a temporary protocol for a sensitive case involving a military dependent. He was told it was sanctioned at a level above his clearance. He was told it would be brief. He was told he would be protected. He had not asked who gave the order. He had not asked why. He had signed what was put in front of him, and he had conducted evaluations on a patient who had been pharmacologically prevented from responding to those evaluations, and he had recorded the findings in good faith. Those were his words, in good faith, said with the emphasis of a man who understands that phrase is his only remaining legal shelter. Cole listened to all of it from the other side of the bed. When Marsh finished, Cole looked at him and said, "You didn't ask because you didn't want to know." Marsh said nothing. "That is not good faith," Cole said. "That is cowardice wearing its Sunday clothes." Marsh had nothing to answer with. He sat down in the chair by the window and did not get up again. Wright retained counsel and did not speak further. Shaw, it emerged within the hour, had not been part of the original arrangement. He had been told only that it was a liability matter requiring careful management, and he cooperated with Reyes completely, producing every communication from Wright's office that had come through his department in the past 8 months. The communications confirmed the chain. Wright had received instructions through a private channel that originated from a staff office connected to Senator Frank Delaney, Defense Appropriations Committee, 11-year incumbent, primary funding conduit for the private military contracting firm that Cole's sealed Senate testimony had named in the Syria Mission Compromise. Reyes took the documentation and stepped into the corridor. She made 3 calls. The last one lasted 4 minutes. Senator Frank Delaney received a call at 11 that evening. It was not from his chief of staff. It was not from his attorney. It was from Reyes, who informed him in precise, unhurried language that he was the subject of a federal criminal investigation involving conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, obstruction of military justice, and the unlawful detention of a dependent of an active duty flag officer. Delaney said he would need to consult counsel. Reyes said that was his right, and that she looked forward to speaking with him in the morning. By 6 a.m., 3 news organizations had received tips about a Senate investigation connecting a defense contracting firm to the Syria Mission Compromise. By 7, Delaney's office issued a statement announcing he would not seek re-election. By 8, his chief of staff had resigned. He was not arrested that morning. These things take time, and Reyes understood that a case built carefully holds longer than one built fast. But the machinery had engaged, and Delaney, who had spent 11 years understanding which levers moved Washington, understood better than anyone that once that machinery engaged, it did not stop. Admiral Cole read the first news alert on his phone in the chair beside Kate's bed. He set the phone face down on the tray table and returned his hand to his daughter's. He did not celebrate. That was not the kind of man he was. He sat with Kate and let justice do what justice does, slowly, imperfectly, and permanently. 22 hours after the first pressure point test, Kate Cole opened her eyes, not with the drama of someone waking from a nightmare, the way dawn arrives, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of moments, each one slightly more than the last, until suddenly the dark is gone and you cannot name exactly when it left. One moment the eyes were closed and the next they were not, and in between was something that had no medical name, but that everyone in the room registered in their own chest like a frequency finding its match. Cole was in the chair beside the bed. He had not left. He was still in his dress uniform, which he had worn for 2 consecutive days, and it was as composed as it had been when he arrived, because he was the kind of man who understood that certain things had to be maintained even when maintaining them cost something. He was holding Kate's hand with both of his when her eyes opened. She looked at the ceiling first. Then, with the careful deliberateness of muscles reclaiming a skill, she turned her head. The movement was small and effortful, the movement of a body that had not been asked to do this in 6 months. But it was directed. She looked at her father. Cole leaned forward. His face, which had been composed and contained and disciplined through 6 months of mornings in this room, came apart at the center, the way things come apart when the reason for holding them together finally arrives. Kate's mouth moved. The ventilator was still in place. Removal would be staged carefully under Voss's supervision in the coming days. But her lips formed something. Cole leaned close, the way he had leaned close to whisper to her every morning, and this time she was moving toward him, too. She mouthed 3 words, "Dad, I heard you." Cole pressed his forehead against his daughter's hand, and his shoulders shook with the force of something that had been held for exactly 184 days and could no longer be held by any act of will or training or rank. He did not try to stop it. For the first time in 6 months, there was nothing left to be strong against. Kate's fingers curled around his and held on. Cole found Morgan in the break room at 3 in the morning. She was sitting alone at the small table with a cup of coffee and her notepad, now full, open in front of her. He sat across from her, and for a moment neither spoke. The break room held the particular stillness of a hospital at that hour, the vending machine's low hum, the distant rhythm of a monitor down the hall, the institutional quiet of a building that never fully sleeps. "I've made some calls," Cole said, "people who know what's in your file. The right people, the ones with clearance and the ones who understand what the work actually was as opposed to how it was officially recorded." Morgan looked at him. "They know what you did here, not just the last 24 hours, the 2 years before, the thread you were following, the connection to Walter Reed, all of it." He placed his hands flat on the table. "The investigation into Delaney's network is going to need people who understand how it operates from the inside. People whose testimony is grounded in direct knowledge." "Morgan, I'm a nurse." "You are whatever you decide to be," Cole said. "You demonstrated that fairly conclusively today." He let that rest. "I'm not asking you to stop being a nurse. I'm asking if you'll talk to Reyes, formally, with DOJ protection, with your record addressed." Morgan was quiet. She looked at the table, at her hands. "How is she?" she asked. The change in Cole's face was the specific and unrepeatable softening of a father asked about his daughter by someone who helped bring her back. It held something in the center that had no name in any military manual he had ever read. "She asked for water this morning," he said, in a full sentence. Morgan nodded, looked at her coffee. "Tell me more about these people," she said. She went in to see Kate one last time before her shift ended. The room was quiet. Early light came through the window at the angle that made the monitors look warmer than they were. Voss had adjusted the ventilator settings overnight, and the machine's rhythm was gentler now, less insistent, the sound of a system beginning to step back. Morgan checked the IV, noted the vitals, updated the chart in the thorough, unhurried way she did everything. She took longer than necessary, and she understood why, and she allowed it. Kate watched her the entire time. Her eyes tracked Morgan's movement around the room with the slow, deliberate attention of someone reclaiming perception, the basic freedom of deciding where to direct your gaze, which she had been denied for 6 months. She had chosen to direct it at Morgan. As Morgan turned to leave, Kate lifted her right hand. The movement was slow and cost something visible. The muscles trembled with the effort of a body reclaiming territory that had been taken from it. But the intention was clear long before the motion completed itself. The hand rose. The fingers came together at the temple. A salute. Imperfect. Barely there. The suggestion of the motion rather than the full motion, but unmistakable in its meaning and in the expression on Kate's face. Not gratitude, exactly, because gratitude was too small for what this was. Recognition. The acknowledgement of one person by another who has understood, without being told, what it cost. Morgan stopped in the center of the room. She looked at Kate's raised hand, at the effort in the arm, still trembling, at Kate's eyes, which were clear and direct and fully present in a way they had not been for 6 months. Morgan did not return the salute like a soldier. She stepped back to the bedside. With the same hands that had pressed behind an ear and mapped 3 weeks of data and held on in the dark without letting go, she pulled the blanket carefully up around Kate's shoulders. She adjusted it at the edges with the attention of someone who understands that small acts of care are not small. Then she rested her hand over Kate's for one moment, not long, just present, and felt Kate's fingers press back, weak but certain. "Rest," Morgan said quietly. "You already won." She picked up her clipboard and walked out. The corridor was empty at that hour. Her footsteps were the only sound on the linoleum. She passed the nursing station, nodded to the overnight staff, and continued to the elevator. She pressed the button. The building hummed around her with the enormous quiet of a place where something had just permanently changed. The doors opened. She stepped in and turned to face the corridor. In the narrow moment before they closed, she had a clear view of the ward, the rooms, the machines, the particular quality of light in a hospital before dawn when the people inside it are still fighting in their various ways to stay. She had been fighting for 6 months. She had been fighting for 2 years before that, in rooms that no longer existed in any official record, under conditions that were never officially acknowledged, for people whose survival was never officially confirmed. She was tired. Underneath the tiredness, she was something else. She was certain. A woman was breathing on her own in a room down the hall. A father who had folded 41 flags was sitting beside his daughter and would not need to fold a 42nd. The paperwork had tried, and the truth had been slower and harder and quieter, but it had arrived. It always arrived. The doors closed. Morgan let out a long, slow breath, the release of something held not for hours, but for years, finally finding its way out into the ordinary air of an ordinary corridor in a building that would never be ordinary to her again. Locked-in syndrome and related disorders of consciousness are misdiagnosed as brain death in an estimated 40% of cases. Some patients remain undetected for years. Cisatracurium and related neuromuscular blocking agents are standard medications in intensive care. Their deliberate misuse, as depicted here, constitutes criminal assault. The pharmacological details in this story are accurate. This story is fiction. The medical reality it is based on is not.